2017 meeting of the NIC Board of Trustees. Would you please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have a quorum. All of the trustees are present. Throughout the evening, we have several guests in the audience that will be introduced through the course of the program, so I'll wait and do that as we get to that portion of the program. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes, and if so, are there any additions, corrections? All right. Hearing none, the minutes will be accepted as presented. We have one sign up for public comment. It's Aaron Davis. Aaron?
President McLennan. As a faculty member here at NIC, I just wanted to express my support for the budget you'll be voting on tonight and express my appreciation that the budget honors the college's salary schedule and its inclusion of a step increase for both faculty and staff. When the college honors its salary schedule, it recognizes that as an institution of higher education that serves the needs of a wide variety of academic and career technical students, North Idaho College's greatest asset is its people. The educators and staff members who carry out the mission, vision, and values of the college every day. The faculty and staff invest in NIC's students and in the community the college serves, and honoring our salary schedule demonstrates that the college is invested in us and, by extension, in the success of our students. And so I'm probably not the only one in the room who feels this way, but I would hope that the board votes to honor our salary schedule and also to always keep our adjunct faculty in mind. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Aaron. Our next agenda item is Celebrating Success Early Childhood Education Program. And Graydon, would you be so kind as to introduce the presenter on that?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, President McLennan, and other guests here tonight. It's truly my honor to introduce our guests here for the celebration. I asked for the opportunity to do that because I am so proud of who they are and what they do. I just had the opportunity yesterday to do the performance appraisal for Jolie Winglikowski, who's the director of our Children's Center, and it was one of the most enjoyable ones to do because of the incredible work that Jolie and her staff have done. And I want to give you just a quick example of that. So much of what you've heard in this last year, and even part of our budget is based on, is the critical importance of enrollment at the college here. And when we talk about enrollment, it's not only the recruitment, of course, but it's the retention and completion. And a year or two ago, Jolie and I had a conversation about what can we do in the Children's Center that helps impact enrollment, not just the provision of childcare for our students, but what do we do to add value to a student's experience here? And Jolie got a hold of that, and with her staff and other people here on campus, the Advising Center and Financial Aid Office and others, worked with them to develop programs in such a way that we're incentivizing and encouraging and having great success with having our students, the parents of the young children that they care for, complete at higher rates, graduate at higher rates, have greater success as a result of some of the supports and some of the systems that Jolie's put in place. So you might not think about the Children's Center being the place that really impacts enrollment. They certainly do because of that provision of childcare. But through their programs, they've impacted completion. They've impacted retention. She's just done an outstanding job and is an example of people across our campus who are really focused in on enrollment and how critical that is and what their part is to encourage that. So it's my pleasure to introduce her. She's going to tell you a little bit more about those programs. You'll hear from Emily also, who's a student in the early childhood education program. And then a little bit later on, there's a chance that you might even meet a child or two from our Children's Center here tonight as well. So it's truly my pleasure to introduce and recognize Jolie Winglikowski.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me. As Graydon introduced, I'm Jolie Wing-Lakowski. I'm finishing up my 19th year here at North Idaho College, and I'm excited to continue my journey here. Let's see here. So the North Idaho College Children's Center is a nationally accredited lab school. We provide early care for, as Graydon said, the children of NIC students, faculty, and staff. But we also serve as a learning lab for our primarily child development students, but other students as well. So this evening, like Graydon said, I would like to promote, talk about some highlights about what and talk about some successes and initiatives that we have going for promoting student success, and then talk a little bit about our instructional lab school. Raising dependent children is one of the greatest challenges that student parents face in their ability to obtain a college degree. As you can see, community colleges enroll the highest number of student parents, with 45% of student parents seeking their education from public two-year institutions like North Idaho College. We know that attainment of degree is vital to finding quality jobs, and that students who leave school without a credential continue to face an uphill battle, not only to support their families, but they also have their student debt that they're paying, which is often much higher than those of non-parent students. But we also know that nationally, completion rates are really low for student parents. So only 28% get a two-year degree within 6 years of enrollment, compared to 39% of non-parent counterparts. And even more striking is that 54% leave without obtaining a degree or credential of any kind. So some of those roadblocks, well, we know obviously that student parents have significantly greater financial needs associated with supporting their families while also attending college. We know that over 2/3 of our community student parents work full-time, so they're really not able to take full-time college classes, so it slows down their progress. Also, the high cost of quality childcare, is prohibitive for many students. So it forces them to choose less reliable and lower quality childcare, and often leads them to withdraw from school in order to care for their dependent children. Our mission of providing a high quality on-campus childcare already plays a significant part in addressing some of these student-parent roadblocks. We know that nationally, student parents that have access to programs like the Children's Center are 26% more likely to complete their educational goals than the general student. So specifically, in the fall of 2006, our average GPA of our student parents was a 3.04, compared to the NIC student average of a 2.52. Their average credit load was 11.54 compared to 10.45. And our student parents completed 95% of attempted credits with a C- or higher, compared to the NIC average of 75 or above. So as Graydon talked about, we are really excited to roll out the STAR program in the fall. It stands for Student Academic Rewards Program, and it's a program designed to reward students by reducing their child care costs, essentially incentivizing them through their progression through their education. So while the details are still in the works, we've been working with financial aid, advising, and I've been networking with other program providers across the nation that run programs similar to ours to really figure out how can we be innovative to help support these parents and get them moved in, moved through, and moved on. So in the STAR program, in exchange for their persistence, essentially, student parents with 9+ credits would voluntarily apply. They would be selected based on a point system. We're going to prioritize our ALICE families, our full-time students, and students that have multiple children. In addition, we're looking for additional, they'd actually have to meet with their advisor at least twice a semester and follow up on any plans. So we're planning those timings so that we can hit some of those early interventions in time to help them to be successful. Then they'll be required to complete the 75% of attempted credits with the 3.0 GPA or above.
Julie, before you leave that, tell
Yes.
us about Alice, which is the income.
I honestly can't can anybody tell me
Oh, was it-
exactly what it stands for?
uh,
Essentially,
It's income
It's the-
less,
it's the working poor. It's the people that make just enough money to not be able to qualify for any,
that's right, income
any,
challenge.
yeah, assistance yet. They're $40 over the income, doesn't pay the mortgage and doesn't pay the food. It doesn't pay the childcare. So really, we're looking to prioritize those families that are in that middle bracket that can't afford to do it on their own, but also don't apply or don't qualify for other assistance. So, if our parents do meet these requirements, essentially we're going to be offering them the equivalent of a $3 a day discount off their child care bill. It's $486 annual savings per child to the family, which may not be a lot, but it's significant to those families. And really, we're looking for additional grants and fundraising opportunities to be able to really make that more impactful. So like more to the tune of $10 a day, where a family could save $1,620 in child care costs. And also, I'd really like to find a way to reward actual completion. So we're looking for ways to do that. So kind of shifting gears a little bit to our function as a learning lab. Did you know that 700 new neural connections are formed every second in the young brain, and it's closer to 1,000 in the first 3 years of life, and that 90% of a child's brain development actually happens before the age of 5. So this rapid development during the early years of life, we know absolutely sets the foundation for all future learning, for all future development, and all future health. So this is why children absolutely need to have a quality early learning environment, rich with meaningful learning opportunities and educated teachers that understand child development and developmentally appropriate practice. As a nationally accredited lab school, the Children's Center meets the highest national standards in the field of early childhood. All of our teachers have degrees in early childhood education, making them excellent coaches and mentors to our students. They model best practice, curriculum development, child assessment, and help coach skills such as talking to families about developmental concerns. As an instructional lab school, we've served 172 students this year with a total of 3,848 hours in our learning lab. And in addition to NIC students, we also serve the University of Idaho and Lewis and Clark Child Development students as well. At this point, Alice, thank you, Lita. Asset limited,
There we go.
income
Income,
constrained, employed. At this point, I'd like to introduce to you Emily Danforth. She is one of our practicum students who's majoring in child development and is a recipient of an NIC Foundation grant. She's going to share a little bit about her experience here as a student in our program.
Hello. So just like Jolie said, my name is Emily Danforth, and I'm majoring in child development. I'm working on my associate's degree right now, and then after that, I plan on transferring to the University of Idaho to get my bachelor's in early childhood education. And I wanted to start by saying thank you so much for every single thing that each one of you have done to ensure the success of students here at North Idaho College, because I have loved my first year here so much. I've absolutely loved it. I've enjoyed my classes. I've loved my teachers. I have to tell you, Kathleen Miller-Green and Leslie Schock are the two best child development professors on the face of this planet. So thank you so much. So I just wanted to start out with that. But my most memorable experience that I've had here so far has been my practicum experience right here in the lab school. Now, something to know is that I currently work in another preschool center. I work at Little Folks, which is another NIAC, or National Association for the Education of Young Children. It's another NIAC accredited center. There's only 2 of them in Coeur d'Alene, and then there's a few other really good quality centers. But I was really grateful to be able to have another school experience. Because before I started my practicum, I had considered just doing my practicum hours at Little Folks, because I thought, oh, it'll be easy, I'm working there already. And then my director and my coworkers, and then even my professors here convinced me. They said, you got to come to NIC, try something different. And it made me realize that, if I were to compare it to ice cream, there's premium ice cream. We fought and worked for that level, but there's different flavors. And that definitely happened. I saw some different flavors between Little Folks and NIC, and it was really fun to get to learn from that experience. And one of my favorite things that I got to take away from each hour that I spent in the classroom here at NIC, I was in the 2-year-old classroom, was I got many different daily curriculum ideas, different activities that you can be doing with the kids on a daily basis, ways you can do guidance and discipline, and you can talk and help 2-year-olds even negotiate over a truck. And so those are some really good experiences there. And but one of my other favorite things was that I got to see larger scale differences. One thing that Little Folks has a philosophy of is serving families. We always say we're serving families, we're serving children. That's kind of our thing. We always say we've been serving families, their children and their families since 1979, and that's what we always say. But one thing that I thought was really cool was that NIC, from what I learned from the teachers, really has a philosophy of partnering with their families. And so serving is great. Serving's awesome, but partnering is a different take. And so I've taken that back to my coworkers and my director, and we've been working out a way that we can do more partnering, and what are ways that we can outreach to more families. And so we've, from one student going to this lab school, that just one student, I believe that we're able to change other centers. And my center has about 100 kids, so if you can just imagine how it just spreads, and I can only picture how many other students have used NIC and who have been able to make those changes too. So I just wanted to say thank you for that opportunity. But on another note, it's not just about me, but there's other students who haven't necessarily had any experience in another child care center, or who haven't had a very quality experience. And I know that when I was taking my practicum class, some of my fellow students didn't have any child care experience at all. One of them had worked at Boys and Girls Club, but I was the only one who was working in a center at that time. And so I know for some of them, when they stepped in, they were like, oh boy, this is different. They weren't quite sure what to do, but they were able to learn from these teachers. And the teachers at the lab school right now are so supportive and so caring, and we were able to really get an awesome experience out of that, whether we had experience in the field or not. And lastly, I wanted to say that the lab school has been great at igniting passion and excitement for the future of early childhood education. I have really so loved getting to learn from Debbie Fields and Melissa Milton. They were the 2-year-old teachers in that room, and I learned so much from them, but the most important thing that I learned was to have passion for early childhood, and to have passion for supporting families, and passion for providing the best experiences for our youngest generation. So thank you so much for all that you do, and I just want to thank you again for letting me speak today.
Thank you again for this opportunity to share our program with you tonight. So as always, we like to leave a little something to brighten your day. So I've got some guests over here. These are my friends Caitlin and, what's her name again? Just teasing, that's Allison Grantham. And these girls are now both alum from the Children's Center, because even little Miss Grantham has graduated. But they've got a little gift for you guys.
Joe.
Why don't you take them out and pass them out?
Hey, great. Good job.
Let's see how many we got here. Did I miss you on that?
They got it. Did they paint the flower pots too, I'll bet, didn't they?
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sweetie. Thank you so much.
Look at the painting on it.
Oh,
Isn't that
I love
painting?
it.
Yay.
So cute.
Hi, Katie.
Try right here. There's room over here.
Oh, how sweet.
Good lifting. Oh, boy. Thank you.
Much.
Thank you.
That's all I have.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there are going to be some comments or questions from Judy?
Okay, sorry, thanks. Sir.
First of all, wonderful presentation, and we do have a lot of questions about the program, but most, I really want to know the artist. Tell us about the artist on this is adorable and very thoughtful.
Well, the artist was the last minute. Our kids have been gone for a couple of weeks, and so my youngest, who's also an alum, but is at gymnastics this evening, made those pots for you.
Oh, very sweet, very sweet. My first real business-related question, I don't know if you covered it right when you started. Do we have a big waiting list?
We do. We have currently, as of today, 278 children on our waiting list.
So every year, we're still not able to serve, and those are children of students?
About 90% of them are students, about 10% are faculty and staff.
So in order to serve all of our students, we need to look at an expansion and additional staff.
Correct.
Okay, we need to have those discussions. Thank you, thank you.
Judy, did you have a comment?
Couple things. Your comments about the brain development are just so powerful and so profound. It reminds me again of our programs we oversee with Head Start, another way to help. And for me, that means we're getting all those folks tuned up to become students at NIC, right?
Right.
Good,
That's right.
thank you. And then I assume admission to the program is based on their child's ability to pronounce your last name?
Never.
For board also. Thank you for your good work.
Thank you.
You may have already told us this, so I apologize, but how many children are currently engaged in the facility?
We, right now, in the spring of 2017, had 61 children enrolled in our program.
We have 61, and the waiting list is 278.
Correct.
Christy, we're going to have to turn over half the campus.
I know it, I know it.
It's our future enrollment.
Julie, thank you very much. You know, when our special gifts were being passed out, I looked around the room. Everybody had a smile on their face.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody was pleased by that. That was so neat. And for Emily, when you said you learned passion, you could tell. As you gave your talk, you showed a lot of passion, and thank you very much for what you do. Julie,
Glad to
thank you
have you.
very much. on
Thank
behalf
you.
of the board.
Thank you.
Our next agenda item is a special report. The governor appointed a task force on higher education, and we are privileged to have from the north some representatives on some of the subcommittees. The task force has been broken up into some subcommittees, and I'm going to ask Steve Meyer, who's on one of the subcommittees, to come up and kind of explain briefly the structure, give us quickly give us a rendition of what the charge of the subcommittee is, and then I'm going to ask Don Saltman, who is with the State Board of Education and on this committee, then Senator Bob Nonini and Chris Martin to give reports on their subcommittees.
Okay, is there a microphone I'm supposed to speak into?
Right on the podium.
Over here.
Yes.
I'm Steve Meyer, and I was appointed to this task force 6 months ago when the governor formed it. The goal is to get 60% of Idahoans aged 25 to 34 to have some sort of a post-secondary degree or certificate by 2020. This was originally created about 5 years ago, and so the 2020 goal had some runway in it, but it's getting a little close now, and we haven't made very much progress. The data from several sources is pretty consistent that about 30-some percent 39, 37, 36% of Idahoans in that age cohort have a post-secondary degree or certificate. That number got a little higher during the recession, and then it went back down. So we've lost a little ground. The task force has 36 members made up of the presidents of the 4 universities, all of the State Board of Education, some legislators, 8 people from the private sector like me, and a few more with some education policy or legislative experience. We've divided ourselves into 4 subcommittees, and I'm on the funding subcommittee, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And here tonight is Don Soltman and Bob Nonini and Rick. Are you all 3 on different subcommittees?
Actually, we're going to have Chris Martin sub for Rick.
And Chris. Our direction in the funding subcommittee is to incentivize progress toward getting to the goal. And we have to support financially the initiatives of some of the other committees, and we haven't seen those goals yet. And our target is to have this recommendation ready for the governor by the 15th of September, so it's only a few months away. As a benchmark, the earlier task force for K-12 education worked on their recommendations for about 2 years, but it was worthwhile because their 20-some recommendations were endorsed by the governor and eventually endorsed by the entire legislature. And the legislature is, in fact, this was the 3rd year, I think, and has followed through with substantially more money for the K-12 education system. And the other objective we want to focus on is trying to make substantial change in a relatively short period of time. My guess is that the 2020 goal is unattainable, and apparently the governor doesn't want to change it, but if we achieve these objectives in 10 years, I think it'll be a success. Here are some numbers which will help you understand the scale of what we're doing. The cohort of 25 to 34-year-olds up at the top is 216,000 people. And if you divide those by the percentages of the various kinds of higher education attainment, the percentage numbers are in the column there, 7%, 19%. So the first 2 rows horizontally, certificates and AA degrees, comprise 26% of the higher education degrees that we're granting in the state. And then the bachelor's level is 26% and the graduate 8%. And so for to reach the target of 60%, it would be divided that way. The interesting numbers are in the subtotal of community college row. And look, our goal is 56,000. What we have in the state is 39,000. So we're 17,000 short. And the interesting number is that the shortage is about 50% of what we have in terms of people with those credentials in the state. So the size of the gap is really substantial. And for purposes of our comments tonight, let's just skip the bottom rows. The other interesting thing is if you go back up to the 216,000, if the population of the state is growing at roughly 2%, and some of that is immigration and some of it is intrinsic growth or organic growth, why 2% alone is 4,000 people a year. That is, the size of the goal keeps creeping away from us because of population growth. So the task we have at the community college level for the state, and for those who haven't heard, we now have 4 community colleges in the state instead of 3. The task is not only to catch up with the difference between 17,000 and 39,000, but to be able to have the capacity to keep up with population growth as well. The strategies that the general group has looked at are strengthen the pipeline, and of course there's a difficult challenge between what has been done for the K-12 objectives and what needs to be done or what remains to be done to coordinate with higher ed. Remediation turns out to be an important part of the process. I'm going to talk a little more about structure for success, and mechanisms to incent progress and leverage partnerships. The most important points here is the middle point, intentional advising along the continuum between high school and college. We've already started at NIC with career pathways, and I heard Larry Briggs talk about this 6 months ago, where there's work going on. And in some cases, in each of these points, some stuff is already happening at NIC. Remediation becomes perhaps the most fruitful part of the process from the speakers that we have heard. Our large group, the 36 people, have spent 2 days listening to outside speakers. One of them could have been our very own Lita Burns, because I think she knows more about this than most of us. But it's really fascinating with the kinds of tools that have been developed to achieve this. But remediation in a model called co-requisite means that students, rather than take remedial classes alone before they can take English 101, is to have students take English 101 and the remedial English class at the same time. And the data is pretty compelling. Students who take remedial classes alone, 60% of them drop out across the country. Those who experience the co-requisite experience simply flips that success scale to where 60% succeed. This set of numbers is a pretty big deviation for some schools, perhaps less so in Idaho, but the advice from Complete College America, which is a national organization that's done a lot of work in this arena, and there's a book they put out called New Rules, which those of you who've not seen it, we should get one for you because it's absolutely fascinating. It's available on the web, and I'll give you the web connection tonight. Change to 60 credits for AA degrees. Change the benchmark for full-time students to 15 credits a semester. 15 times 8 is 120 if you're in the BA degree, or 60 at community college. The 12 comes from a federal guideline to get financial aid. I think it's Pell Grants, isn't it, Graydon, that you have to take 12, and that has become the de facto standard for many people. And if we just need, as a policy matter, to change that to 15. And then the recommendation from Complete College America is to make 15 credits the same price as 12. That has some financial implications for schools, and I know some for NIC, which others, Rick, can address more fully than I can. Then, in terms of policy that can come from the State Board of Education or the state of Idaho, is to try to incent these changes to get more graduates from the education system with money. And it's pretty simple arithmetic. The state is going to advocate to the legislature, I believe, among other things, a program called outcomes-based support for the schools, which means instead of getting paid by population or getting state support based on population, part of that formula will be based on the success, that is, the number of certificates or the number of degrees. And there'll be different metrics for community colleges as there would be for the four-year schools. And in my view, I'm going to advocate that we not pay very much attention in this first part of this program to graduate school, because the numbers are so small for graduate master's degree and PhD degrees in Idaho, and the numbers are so large for certificates and AA degrees. And then there will be an opportunity to bias the compensation scheme for the universities to achieve other goals, low-income family students. The earlier presenter talked about ALICE students, asset-limited, income-constrained, but employed. We can do that, and we can focus, or we can incent STEM students. And then the state, and I don't know much about this last point, the State Board of Education has an idea about redesigning the financial support system. There's 5 specific recommendations, and some of these are already underway at NIC. ending the college in math, ending the practice of using algebra as the default math class. Many careers don't need algebra, and in many cases, the math department wants algebra to be the prerequisite for calculus. And for most students today, neither calculus or advanced algebra is necessary. Simple algebra, yes, but that needs some thought so we don't form blockades for student success. I've already talked about co-requisite remediation. 15 to finish is the notion that we line up curriculum so that if students follow them, they will succeed and graduate with an AA degree in 60 credits. This next one is structured schedules, and I found this incredibly simple but really fascinating, particularly in community colleges. The notion of structuring schedules so that people can take all the classes they need in the morning or in the afternoon or in the evening in blocks, so that students who have jobs or family obligations don't wind up with a class at 10 and a class at 2 and a class on odd days at 3:30. Within the structured schedule discussion is the point about how do we manage shared governance, which is often the desired standard in the education world, with moving schedules to accommodate students as our first priority. And the recommendations from Complete College America are pretty forthright about suggesting that control of the curriculum ought to have faculty participation, and control of the administration of the college ought to be run by the administration. And I suspect in some colleges that's going to be a bigger hurdle than it should be. And then the last one is the guided pathways. And the most important point there, and I put it in italics right in the middle of the paragraph, is guarantee that the milestone courses will be available when they are needed. Milestone courses means if you've got to have whatever it is in your curriculum as a required class, that you can't run into the situation where it's not available in the second semester. You know, you got to take in the first. So work out this guided pathway thing so that the progress of student progression is done in an orderly fashion, and they are absolutely available. And then the last point, and Braden will be happy with this one, is efficient intervention. Intervention has to do with being sure that students have advisors at every step of the way, and that now that we have electronic registration, every student's advisor can be aware of what they signed up for. And if they didn't sign up for the right stuff in their curriculum, then the recommendations from Complete College America are intervene. Advisor, call the student, let's talk about this. Because if you are supposed to be taking prerequisites for chemical engineering and you signed up for basket weaving, you're going to screw up this 15 credits or 60 credits to finish. And so we have to staff the school with a sufficient advisory capacity to be able to coach students to success. And from what I read, that single measure alone has more to do with ultimate success than any other of these points. And the whole point of it all, what do we get from all this, is retention. Fund extensive advising capability. My favorite story from the stuff they've handed out for us to read was from Georgia State, where I think about 6 years ago, the state funded $10 million to hire 50 counselors across the university system. In 3 years, their retention went from low 30s to over 60%. So, and we've seen case studies from Colorado and Arkansas and Montana and several others that make these points really clear that it works. So that's what we're doing in the funding committee. I will hand out these two URLs if you want to go and read more about this. And Don, are you next, or Bob?
Yeah, Steve, would stand by, because I'd like each of you to make your report, and then there may be some questions of you collectively. Don? Don Saltman with the State Board of Education, and
Chairman Howard and members of the board, President McLennan. Obviously, Steve's committee has done quite a bit of work, and I would say much more work than my committee. And there's a reason for that. At the same time that the governor formed the higher ed task force, he also formed the workforce development workforce. And my particular subcommittee is dealing with aligning the needs of the workforce and trying to integrate those into the higher ed institutions. So we on our committee are pretty much waiting for the work of the workforce development task force. Dave Hill co-chairs that, and he has assured me that they will have their report done by the end of June. So with that report coming to us, hopefully that'll kind of give us a template on which to build our work. We've had one meeting, we'll have another meeting next week. Our first meeting we focused on apprenticeships and talked with the folks from Idaho Power. They've got a very viable program and have had one for several years. We talked also about the needs of economic development and met with those economic development folks from Boise and the Treasure Valley. So that's been our work to date. So not nearly the work that Steve's been able to do on his subcommittee. There are 4 subcommittees. President McLennan, you're on one of those. Not sure which one.
The K-20 pipeline.
K-20, and you're going to give that report, I guess. Okay, and then Senator Nonini and myself both serve on the workforce alignment. So, Senator, there he is. Bob.
Senator Nonini.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. As Steve had said, there are 36 members on the committee. That's one more than in the entire Idaho Senate. You know how much work we get done in the Senate, so there'll be probably less work done by the task force. Humor aside for a second, 6 legislators of the 36, 3 House members and 3 senators, and 4 Republicans of the 6, 2 Democrats of the 6. So we have 2 Republican senators, 1 Democrat senator, and the same for the House. Some JFAC members when it comes to appropriations or what might be needed in the proposals that the governor will put forth in the fall that the legislature will look at next January. And on the Senate side, there are 2 of us, a Democrat senator on the Education Committee and myself. Some of the things that we talk about in the Senate amongst my colleagues, which I think will be a selling point and a connection, and Steve touched on some of those which we find frustrating, is the remediation side of things. And students that come from the upper 30 or 40% of their high school graduation class that then come into college and need remedial math and English is frustrating. It takes then 5 to 6 years to get a 4-year degree. That leads to then dropouts and not getting a certificate, a 2-year degree or a 4-year degree or an upper degree. So we want to look at those issues. I think that there's a disconnect and has been a disconnect for a number of years between K-12 and higher ed. And where can we get the disconnect connected so there is a better transition for those kids to go on, or excuse me, young people, I don't mean to say kids, young adults, it's just a habit when you get to be my age. Just call them kids.
You're old.
Well, I am old. I was talking to Steve about Steve and Judy's son, and I still referred to him as a kid.
We did too.
Yeah, that's what Steve said, Judy. So that's a frustration in the legislature, is the remediation side of things. And then the cost of the tuition and fees going up. And where can the state help in that regard? And I think with 6 members of the legislature on this committee of 36, to try to sell it to the legislature if it comes down to appropriations and what can the state do. I know that this last legislative session there was a 5.3%, excuse me, I think a 6.3% increase for K-12, a 5.3% increase by the legislature appropriated to career technical, and an increase for the four-year universities and the community colleges also. So we're trying to make our headway in that regard, but you all know what happened years ago, 10, 11 years ago, through the beginning of the recession, and how things were cut in Idaho. It made it very tough. We're trying to make that headway. The counselor situation also, I think, is important from the legislative side of things. There has been some proposals the last couple of years, and Steve also talked about that in his presentation, in trying to encourage young people in middle school to start looking at what their future might be. And counselors doing and I don't want to say a better job, they're doing a pretty darn good job, but when you talk to counselors and how many students each counselor has, it is a pretty high hurdle for those counselors to get to all those students. And Brad, from his prior career as superintendent of the Lakeland District, could speak in depth about that issue. But we're trying to make headway in that regard. And then the last thing I'll touch on, which is a shining spot for the Coeur d'Alene, Post Falls, and Lakeland school districts, is K-Tech. And it's a shining star that North Idaho College could be part of also with the career technical facility out there. And Lewiston is looking at doing the same thing right now, and the governor talked about that this last session in his State of the State with Lewiston School District and Lewis and Clark State College. And we're using that model, and it's very easy for President McLennan and Steve and Don and myself to be on the higher ed task force and talk about North Idaho, because we represent that part of the state of the task force and the great work that's done by K-Tech and North Idaho College out there. And I think that helps also bridge a disconnect I mentioned earlier, and how we can work towards building that bridge so those students that want to go on, and whether it's just a certificate, a 2-year degree, or a 4-year degree, or upper degree, then have an easier way to access that. So those were my notes. I would sure stop at that point. Steve covered it quite well. Don followed him, and I was here to pick up any crumbs, and they didn't leave many. So stand for questions if there are any.
If you, wait just a minute, and we'll get the last report in, and then we'll
okay.
probably have questions of all of you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I am a proxy for Dr. McLennan, and would just like to highlight a little bit from the K-20 Pipeline Committee. Much of it has been mentioned previously, but the real focus has been on how can we better support the high schools and the junior high and the middle school students to really develop the pipeline and have that impact on go-on rate, as well as the completion rates at the community college and the university. How can we impact that earlier on? And so you've heard some of that conversation tonight, but a big part of the discussion has been very robust around dual credit and the impact that it has on go-on rates. By allowing students to have the chance for success in a college classroom, it greatly bolsters their confidence and their ability to successfully complete college. The investment that's already been made in career and college planning at the high school levels, using near peers as a great model that's used all across North Idaho, but how can we better leverage that to ensure that students have a plan, that they've got the support that they need, and to Senator Nini's point, we're supporting the counselors to help those students actually take advantage of that plan. Some things that have come to light through this, which I think are fascinating, is that each district in the state of Idaho currently submits a plan to the State Board of Education about how they're going to impact go-on rates today. And so better analyzing that data, better encouraging districts and working with districts collaboratively to see what they're doing and maybe what the successes are across the state and share that information more broadly. With that, students in the 8th grade are making plans now. And so it is my understanding that the first class that made their plan in 8th grade will be college freshmen this year. And so we're looking at the success of that, what's worked, gleaning the best practices to make sure that we're doing everything we can to build on what's already being done. So that's been a key focus of this committee. The next piece of that, I think, is really key for us here in North Idaho, but that's building the awareness with not just students, but with families on the return on investment that they have in education. whether it be a certificate, an associate's degree, or a bachelor's degree, what that return truly is. And with our current generation, helping them see the relevance that what they're learning in the classroom will translate into a career that will not only support their family, but will support Idaho as a whole. So the questions this committee is focusing on are how do we impact go-on rate? And really, what should those milestones be in the next 5 years, as well as impacting completion rate earlier on. So from an 8th grade level on, building that culture of you're going to go to college and you're going to complete, and really making sure that the pieces that come out of this committee support what the districts are doing. And finally, this is really amazing, the discussion with the states that have successful programs. And so what's come to light in this conversation is specifically the Indiana 21st Century Scholars Program and how they've started so early on in students' lives to build that culture of you can go on, and we're going to incent you with every step of the way as you go through your high school career to prepare you for college. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for those reports. I'm going to open it up now. Are there any questions from members of the board?
Certainly. Thank you.
And let me ask you, if you need to address it to one of the presenters, that's fine, or maybe they can decide who wants to answer your question.
Well, I think I know who. I'm just going to take a wild stab at who knows the most about NIC specifically. So Chris Martin. Chris, I was on the K-12 school board for a number of years, and one of the issues that I felt impacted the go-on rate was curriculum alignment. So with all the different school districts across the state and the few community colleges, I know you can't talk about what everyone's doing, but can you talk about what NIC specifically, rather than just our conversation with counselors about, this program would be good for you, this one, what are we doing with Lakeland, Coeur d'Alene, Post Falls, specifically with curriculum? So when they want to take a freshman English class, they're prepared, and there isn't the remediation, because I think it does impact the go-on rate, the dropout rate. So curriculum alignment is my question.
So two answers very quickly to that, and Dr. Burns may want to step in here, but I think the best model that we've seen is the development of dual credit, because we are working with the teachers in those high schools, so they know exactly what you need to be successful in that first English class, because their colleagues or themselves are teaching those classes. And I think we're seeing better alignment through our efforts through dual credit. And the next answer to that is on the CTE side. I think that's a outstanding model where we've worked so closely with K-Tech, with truly their faculty and our faculty sitting together saying, how do we best bridge this pipeline? I'm not sure we're at that level where we have those direct conversations as freely on the general education side, but I know it's happening through dual credit. Dr. Burns, do you want to add to that?
Thank you, Chris. I would love to add to that. Chairman Howard, Trustee Wood, I would absolutely agree with your assessment of a lack of consistent curricular alignment. I agree with Chris as well that we have seen progress made with our dual credit. And I think as we are learning more about how to utilize dual credit to our best advantage, we are figuring out that our best method is to make sure that we are offering dual credit in the general education arena. So all the general education courses, and limiting the number of other kinds of courses that students or high schools may be interested in taking or offering to their students that don't necessarily assist them in that completion progress, because at that point many students don't know the direction that they may be going in terms of attaining a certificate or a degree. And to that end, then, I would take us back to the whole guided pathways conversation. When we talk about implementing guided pathways, it is a continuum. We are focusing most heavily right now on North Idaho College and how to set up our curriculums. But when we have established the curriculums at North Idaho College, we absolutely will need to reach out to our K-12 partners. The example that I would offer that would be of primary importance would really be looking at the math pathways that Steve alluded to make sure that as we have a student who is interested in STEM, that we get them in the proper math pathways to get as quickly as they can to calculus. When we have a student who is interested in business, we get them in the math pathway that will get them to a higher level of statistics, to complete their college requirement for statistics, because that's likely what they're going to need. So those conversations are going to lead us to a tremendous greater level of collaboration with our K-12 partners. We also have to do the same thing on the transfer end to make sure that the curriculums that we are developing for our associate degrees, that they align well with what is required at our universities. Particularly, we will look very closely at our two primary transfer institutions, which is the University of Idaho and Lewis Clark State College, but certainly we want to make sure that across the state, and we do this through the LOC here, the Local Area Control Committee on Higher Education, that we make sure that we are also in alignment with our other four-year institutions in the state. So lots of opportunity ahead of us. We have not gotten to the point where we want to be, but we certainly are excited about the future and how this is already looking to line up much better than it has in the past.
So, Mr. Chair, one follow-up on that. Is there specifically, right now, higher educators meeting with K-12 educators to discuss curriculum?
I would say not to my knowledge. We have invited community member from University of Idaho to participate in our Guided Pathways initiative. It's not worked out well. It's just trying to coordinate schedules is really hard. And we understand that it will be our responsibility to reach out and very intentionally meet with K-12 partners. We have avenues to do that. We just have to get our ducks in a row before we're ready to go out and have those conversations.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, my brief comments and question will be more directed towards Bob and Steve, since they're on the Finance Committee. As you both are well aware, and many in this room are, we have a real disjointed set of funding mechanisms for the community colleges. Right now, CSI and S are under one funding process. CWI kind of comes out of the hip pocket of the governor, and we've just added the fourth. Of course, we have the State Liquor Fund, which hasn't been updated for about 40 years, and it's an interesting burden on the different counties. As Bob, I know you know some are actually negative, and Kootenai County gets lots of liquor money, but we're already paying, so, you know. Do you think one of the things that you guys would be able to accomplish as part of this task force is to come up with a comprehensive plan for the normalization of the funding models so that there's an equivalent funding mechanism for all four of the community colleges instead of kind of this hodgepodge methodology that we have now? How does that look, guys? Do you think we can make some progress on that under this initiative?
Well, let us share the response. From what I've heard, you know, I'm a long ways from expert. The next step, Todd, is going to be this outcomes-based reimbursement or funding scheme, OBF, where going away from payment for students, as we do today, essentially pay for fannies in the seat, the state, part of the state compensation or payment scheme to the college will have little to do or nothing to do with where the student came from, but will simply be if you graduated a certificate and in some definition you'll get $465, and if you graduate an AA degree you'll get $2,200, and it's probably going to be post-performance. That is, somehow we'll have to bridge the gap, but within a few years, a portion of the funding, not all of it, but a portion of it, and the discussion ranges from 5% to 20%, comes from results, which will tend to de-emphasize the present scheme where we have different, at least in the terms of the tuition levels, you have different prices for residents or people within the district and people from outside the district.
Todd, good question. You and I have had conversations about this in the past.
Yes, sir.
Excuse me. You know, with a board that runs a community college, there's more local control. And so, hence you have local property taxes. And to take that away, because I have constituents, and you know who they are, without mentioning names, that own a lot of property in Kootenai County, that say, well, gee, the state should pay for community colleges, and it shouldn't be up to the property taxpayers to pay. The issue in the legislature, to address your specific question about, yes, the liquor fund needs to be looked at again. It hasn't been looked at for years. Some counties are negative, some counties are positive, and the counties that are positive take that money, which is specifically supposed to be used for credits for their county students attending community colleges, and put it in slush funds and use it for other things within their counties, which is not acceptable, basically against the law. The second point would be to try to convince the legislature, and I think that the 6 of us that are on that committee, and some are members of the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee, is that an investment in education is a good thing for the state of Idaho. And when I said in my comments that we had a 6.3% increase in K-12, a 5.3% increase in career technical, a small increase for the 4-year schools and the community colleges, it was, I think, around 3%, maybe a little bit less. And Chris might be able to give me the exact number, but, it was far from the 6.3 in K-12, and as trustees, and then the tuition and fees that you have to increase. So we as a state, we as a legislature, need to come to an agreement that the funding we put in is an investment, and it will help. We don't need to talk about cutting taxes when the economic development people, and Steve mentioned this, or Don mentioned this, one of our meetings of the entire task force, of the sub-task force that Don is the co-chair of, we heard from the Boise Economic Development, it's the Jobs Plus group from the Treasure Valley. When they look at businesses, or businesses look at the Treasure Valley, they don't want to know what the tax structure's like. They want to know what the education system's like, and they want to know what the workforce is like. And so it isn't like, oh, gee, your taxes are too high, we're not coming to Idaho. That's way down the list. But then getting that point across to the majority, 18 senators or 36 House members, is the task we have. So yes, we will look at that, and I hope that this task force, the subcommittees of the full task force, can address these concerns and present them to the governor.
Yes, just a quick follow, and then my only thought on that, one, would be it'd be interesting to see where they come up with the funding for the outcome-based education payments, because obviously the state won't come all out of their budget, so maybe they go and take some of that county money or something. So it'll be interesting to see how they come up with the funds to do that. And the only other thing I would caution, and Steve, I know you're probably pretty aware of this just from talking with Judy, but anytime we talk about outcome-based education and funding, and that being the primary funding mechanism, there's always a concern, at least here at the community college, I believe, in how we define a success. Sometimes we're a little rigid on it's either this degree or this certificate with this certain time period. But I would even suggest to you that if I have a young person in a welding program and they get recruited to a job and then become a gainfully employed, contributing member of society, that could be counted as a success. So I just hope that we're insightful in how we define success and how we trigger those funding mechanisms on the outcomes. That'd be my thing. Like K-Tech, Bob brought that up, tremendous success at K-Tech. As Ron Nielsen will tell you, there's 96, 98% or something, but their definition is graduated, got a job, went on, furthered their education, went into the military. So they have a number of categories within which they get that check mark for success. And I think that's appropriate. So I don't know how we adjust that or modify it for us at the community college level, but just something that I think we need to think through carefully.
Red?
Probably for Steve and Senator Nonini, maybe even Chris, but Senator Nonini talked about the counselors, and I would say that at NIC, the dual credit program is dialed in, and you're probably getting most kids who are already intending to go to college. The near peer program that's been put in really focuses on those kids who would be a first-time college student, and it's that group. And the Georgia story interests me, and so I guess that's a bold move that they did. I don't know if Idaho could be so bold, but if you focus on what you want to accomplish, and if that's recruitment of students, then put your money there and get out and recruit those students. The connections are already made, at least at NIC, out to the local schools. It's there. There's a lot of students there that don't know what programs will best serve them, and it's a matter of getting out to them. So, Steve, I guess I'm wondering if that counselor focus has been vetted even further to the point of saying this is something that we have to do to increase sustained enrollments.
Let me respond to Todd first and then Brad. Todd, we've seen data from a number of states about how to manage outcome-based funding. And the advice that seems to be widespread is for the states to keep the formula simple. And we've seen some case studies where the formula was incredibly complex. In fact, we talked with some guy on the phone, I don't remember whether it was Colorado or Montana, and he made the same point verbally, that when the calculation gets really complex, the likelihood that the really bright school people at the universities and the colleges will figure out how to game the system makes it impossibly difficult to keep it fair. So their advice was, in spite of the compromises necessary, keep the formula simple. And that probably means there's a definition of what a certificate is, and either you issued it or you didn't. And if a student went for 9 months and in an 11-month certificate program and he left the school because he got a job, he probably is not counted as a certificate earner, and probably the university or the college doesn't get paid that dollar. I'm not sure how it's going to turn out, but we certainly had compelling input that keeping the formula simple made a lot of sense. With respect to counselors, I don't think I know the answer. We haven't gone that far, and at least in the funding subcommittee, we probably won't, but there are other subcommittees who will probably address that. The crossover between what the K-12 group did the last couple of years and what we're supposed to do has been pretty clearly defined in the assignments to the higher ed task force. Don't redo what's already been done. That's been done, it's working. Legislature has bought into it and provided additional dollars, largely additional dollars for the teacher ladder program. But I think it's still murky because our success in higher ed for getting students is so intertied with what happens in high school. And I don't have a very good answer. Rick is over there smiling, and he knows more about this than I do.
The only thing I'd add is that, part of the instructions with the task force, and by the way, the full task force is meeting next Friday, and what'll happen out of that is you're going to see all the overlap from the 4 subgroups, and I think a lot of that'll will fall out, some of it. But one of the guidelines that we got at the beginning of this whole thing, relative to the K-12 task force, was this task force is a higher education task force, and Murky doesn't even describe, I think, the conversations, at least on the K-20, on the Go On subcommittee. Almost everything that we've talked about, Chris, is K-12. It has absolutely nothing to do with the sphere of control that higher education really has, other than we're a critical communication link. And the input that I've tried to provide is that while we can task K-12 with a focus on college knowledge and college access and support for students going on to college, there's got to be a clear and more defined connection with higher education for the transfer of that information and the expertise to actually allow that to happen. And so I think there's something there. I don't think our group is going to quite get to that point, but it'll be interesting when we get to the full committee to find out how much of these solutions that we're looking at have nothing to do with what higher education can do, but really back into the K-12 system.
I would just comment, or in reference to Todd, your last question, on funding. Boise State instituted a program a few years ago, and if you follow the program that Boise State puts together and you don't complete your 4-year degree in 4 years, then they'll pay for any additional semesters you need to get done. So Boise State had a program that seems to be working, and it's just a few years old, but at least they're incentivizing people. They put the program together, so you have to follow the credits that they put forth for a 4-year degree. So I just wanted to add that. And Brad, to your comment, if the task force doesn't work on those issues, that doesn't mean that the legislature can't adopt some of those issues, for sure. Because we're hearing, I think, really good things. I mean, we got great minds. We got, Steve Meyer, Don Soltman, we got the entire state board on that task force, some great business leaders from around the state, but also 6 legislators. So, we're going to hear things that we can work on, whether it's recommended to the governor or not, and I think the governor would be more than willing to buy in, hopefully.
Yeah. After her.
Just to follow up on that, what can we as an NIC board do with any of you representatives to the task forces to highlight what we see as needs? Are there things we should be advocating or a charge we should send to you about? We know and have seen the need for counselors early on, the barriers that we have. Is there something there now or in the next, I think the final report is due in September, that we as a community college can speak to? I'm going to look at my state board member there to...
Well, you have a member, Rick's on the committee. I think as a board, you can certainly charge him with carrying or taking your voice to the greater committee. So I think that's what I would focus on. You're already doing a lot of good things, and I know that I've talked with Graydon. I think you're going to put some counselors out in some of the schools. At least that's a line item, maybe. So, there's some good things already happening. But
Okay, so then one follow-up one on the, I guess mostly with Senator Nooney, on the remediation issue, because we really have 2 levels of it we deal with here at NIC. One is remediation for folks who've been out of community college or out of education for years, and they're coming back and need tune-up, as would I for some classes I might want to take, versus the folks that have come from our local school systems who are not yet tuned up enough. How do we balance out responsibility for, please don't send folks out of high school without the skills they need to come to our community college?
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Meyer, working with Trustee Murray in his experience, I think it's just that what I said earlier in my opening comments. I feel a disconnect when a student that is in the top third or 40% of their graduating high school class ends up at a college, whether it's a community college or 4-year, and needs remedial math, remedial English. That's unacceptable. And so, something in the K-12 system knows that.
Did you have another question?
I did real quick. Bob, you mentioned the program at Boise State. Along those lines, this past year, and Chris may be able to articulate this better, but we had put in a proposal, and the genesis of it was essentially that if someone was close, within so many credits of graduating, that we could find some funding to help get them over the hump, maybe even bring them in during the summer. And my understanding is that some folks liked that idea or that proposal, but didn't fund us under the idea that maybe that'd be something, if they did it, it'd need to be across the board to all the community colleges, and maybe even extend to the 4-year institutions, but at least to all of the community colleges. Are you aware of that? Have you heard anything on that? Is anybody talking about that as something going forward as part of this, possibly?
There was a bill that the governor had proposed about finishing college, and if you had so many credits.
Yeah, if you.
But it wasn't just for North Idaho College, it was a statewide program, and it never got a hearing on the House side. And so that's where it stalled out. And unless you're talking about something different, Trustee.
Maybe I could get some help here.
So that was the bill, and that was for all of us. I think it was $3 million, maybe. Had a lot of support, obviously, didn't get through. I think the one that you're referring to was the JFAC proposal, no, the summer completion.
A line item. Yeah, there's two different things, but that was one of them. But maybe Chris can speak to that. I didn't articulate it well.
Yeah, Chris.
One at a time, please.
Chairman Howard, Trustee Banducci, we did put in a line item request for a summer completion initiative as a pilot. And you've articulated it well, allowing people who had some credits close to completion to come to summer here at NIC and get the credits they needed to finish their certificate or their AA degree. It was not recommended by the governor, and in large part due to the support for the adult completer program.
Thank you. I have a question that maybe cuts across several committees. I really like the idea that there's a subcommittee on the workforce alignment, which is, I think, what you're working on, Don. And one of the issues that became apparent to me as I became a trustee is, as we look to trying to educate a higher percentage of people in this state, one of the challenges that we face is education isn't really appreciated in this state a whole lot, and we need to incentivize people to seek an education. We can offer all kinds of courses, all kinds of opportunities in schools, but if we can't fill the seats, if people don't want to sign up, then it's not going to work. And so how do we get people to be incentivized to get an education, to know that it's in their best interest? We talk about it. We talk about the statistics about how where Idaho is in the national rankings in terms of people in poverty level and below the families that are below the poverty level and that sort of thing. And so we know there's pressures on the families here to go out and work immediately and try and make an income to earn a living. So some way we've got to find a way to incentivize them to say that education is important, because then as we talk about go-on rates, that's people who have already incentivized initially anyway, and we're going to try and incentivize them to stay in there. We talk about completion, and we're talking about trying to find ways to get people through the system in a timely fashion. But I think our big challenge is going to be getting people into the system initially. And I can't help but think that the idea of getting employers involved more in terms of incentivizing people in this state to get an education and finding ways to get employers to say, even to their present employees, you want a raise, you got to go out and get a couple credits at a junior community college, or you want a promotion, I'm going to require some education to do it. They go home and they tell their kids, you better get an education or you're not going to be able to keep your job. We've got to create an environment in this state where we understand that education is necessary. And your group, I think, I was really pleased with the formation of it as a subgroup, because you got an opportunity to look at that and see if there are ways to incentivize people to get into the system. Some of the large corporations will have apprenticeship programs, and they'll have programs, but there are mid-sized and smaller businesses that hopefully we could find models that we could get them to get their employees and the kids of their employees incentivized through maybe tax breaks, maybe something else. And so I'm wondering whether there's any discussions about trying to get employers involved in the education system, because education can't do it all by itself.
Chairman Howard, I'd make a couple quick comments. It's either Steve and or Judy are part of the Idaho Business for Education, I believe, serve on the board. Is it you, Trustee Meyer? Yeah. Right. They've developed over the last couple of years a really good relationship with the Idaho legislature. And so we're hearing from employers, and that group has large employers and medium-sized and small employers, so we're hearing that. And the other issue is as a lifelong northern Idaho resident, when I grew up, you could get out of high school and go to work in the woods, go to work in the sawmill, or go to work in the mines and make a pretty good living. And now with technology and the aspects, whether you go up to the Lucky Friday and see what Hekla's doing, or go down to Lewiston and what Clearwater Paper or Idaho Forest Group are doing with their mills and their paper plants, you need to have an education to work in those facilities, and they're having a hard time finding the right kind of people in Lewiston, and that's why Lewiston School District and LCSC wants to copy the model that K-Tech and North Idaho College have done out here on the Rathdrum Prairie. So I think we're making that progress. It's just to try to have the patience to get it done, and at my age, I'm starting to run out of patience.
Thank you.
Chairman Howard, many of the things that you just mentioned are things that the subcommittee will in fact be looking at. I did mention that we had already talked with Idaho Power on their apprenticeship program. Our intent is to have several more Idaho-based companies explain to us and show us their apprenticeship programs. I think as you said, I think there are other opportunities. Small and medium-sized businesses can do things short of an apprenticeship. Certainly, we're going to work with Ken Edmonds' Department of Labor, and part of what we want to do is identify what those job force needs are so that we can then make people aware of them. CTE has done a really good job, I think, and I think will continue to do a good job of identifying those top 10 labor hits, if you will, of the hottest jobs. And, so I think making people aware that there are opportunities and then linking those opportunities with business to get the kids into them.
Thank you very much. The other question that I had was, and maybe Steve, you could answer this one. When we use the terms outcomes-based funding and completion funding, and probably everybody's heard me say this before, that just it causes concerns from the basis of a community college because of the wide array of participants we have in community college programs. And I know that your suggestion earlier was that no matter how it turns out, we got to keep the formula simple or it won't work. But at the same time, I would hope that as the funding discussion goes on, that there's an appreciation for not just the wide array of students that we get. I mean, we have, I think our average age this year is like 26 or 27. We have people coming in and out of the educational system depending on needs and their employment and that sort of thing, so that the completion definition, it might be something fairly unique for community colleges because it's what we do. It's exactly how we're designed. It is to meet those instantaneous needs, even workforce training when they come in for just a few courses. So I would hope that we don't, as community colleges, get penalized in the consideration of outcomes and completion when those terms mean something entirely different in the community college setting.
It's a very good question, and those points have been brought up in the conversations that I've been in, and I believe there is a clear distinction between the mission of the community college and the four-year university system. And in some of the slides that I had, well, even the word consistent with the mission were in the definition. I think the community college management, the presidents, and we have all 3, 4, I guess now, presidents in the group, will have an opportunity to participate in the definitions of what is success. If we go all the way back, and again, I want to focus on the simplicity part because the problem is so broad and so complex that we'd get really tied up for hours in trying to figure out all the alternatives. The definition of success by the Georgetown University language that said 60% of the people in the 25 to 30 26 to 35 cohort will need some sort of post-secondary education. The opportunity to define what that success is or what that certificate is will be open to be discussed and determined. I want to help you think about the numbers on the little table I put up. The scale of the problem is enormous. That is, we need to see the community college produce 50% more graduates in order to achieve this objective in the next 10 years. And so trying we need to be meticulous about the definition, but at the same token, I don't want to get hung up on the definitions because the scale of the problem is big. And for Idaho to grow from being a natural resource-based economy where timber and mining, which have been our mainstay in the north for 100 years, are now not very effective. And in southern Idaho, agriculture and semiconductors, I guess, are the two major industries. And the semiconductor guys will take care of themselves, and the ag industry has relatively low skill requirements. But we need to change the education paradigm, as you suggest, in Idaho, and have more educated people. You made the point earlier, Ken, about how do we get more students influenced by whoever their influencers are. I've made the case that it used to be parents, but since half of the families now are single-parent families and most of them are women, they're so busy trying to make a living, figuring out how to make the insurance payments, run one car, and fend off their high school students' appetite for a second car, that their opportunity to say, and many of them don't have college educations themselves, to create that goal is difficult and probably not something that we can expect to change in the short term. The other peer influence on the students, and Brad, you know more than I do, but I would guess they listen to their colleagues in school about what their goals are. And the third one is social media, which I profess to know very little about. And especially in the context of how it influences a high school student's thinking. You know, our president has mastered how to get a lot of attention from social media, and maybe there's some lessons there. So the concept of what do we teach and how do we get students there, I think is really complex. Asking businesses, and Ken and I have had this discussion a number of times already, most of us in the business sector are probably like you. I cannot tell you what the job descriptions are going to be 10 years from now. Certainly in the technology world, where I have some experience, it's hard to define 3 years from now, no less 10 years from now. And we need to be thinking about what those are. But turning to the business sector and saying, tell us what you want, in the advisory committee framework we have here at NIC, you're going to get plant managers and superintendents and personnel managers telling what they want because Joe is going to retire in 3 years and we need his skill set, or Sam is going to leave the company and we need to replace the foreman in the molding department next year or next month. But to get senior management to sit down and think about what do we need 10 years from now, because that's the people we're training today, is extraordinarily difficult. So the notion that there's some saving grace in turning to match up business needs with the education program, I'm concerned is faulty logic, that we're not going to get there very easily. So I would caution some care that relying on that mechanism for feedback needs to be gauged in terms of how valid it really might be. So then you turn back around to saying the higher education community ought to be helping us do this forecasting. And of course, the business community is frustrated with that too. It's a tough problem.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the board? We've taken a lot of your time, but I appreciate it. It's been very informative for us, and I really appreciate the reports. And we'll look forward to maybe doing this again when we get closer to the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you again. Thank you very much. Our next agenda item are constituent reports. Caleb, you're up.
Good evening, Chairman Howard, Board of Trustees, President's Cabinet, President McLennan, and guests. So I've been working on a few things over the summer, along with a couple of the new ASNIC representatives. And one thing that I've really been working on, especially with Nancy, is conferences. So we have iLead, or the Institute for Leadership Education and Development, happening June 4th. And we have decided to send Robert to the University of Massachusetts, which is where the conference will be held, and he's looking forward to that. We also have NACA, or the National Association for Campus Activities, which is happening June 22nd, and that's going to be at University of Denver, Colorado. And we're sending 4 of our representatives, me included, and 3 other senators. We've also been looking into Cecil Summer Splash. We're looking forward to enjoying the nice weather and engaging with the students and community and reaching out to those and establishing a connection between us and ASNIC. And also, last but not least, we have a few committees. I've been working with Jess on orientation, and today we did a walkthrough of what the students will be going through, so it was nice to kind of visualize to see what students will be doing and how they will be acting on campus during orientation. We've also been having presentations from financial aid and IT, and so we've been kind of just trying to like evaluate that from a new student perspective to kind of better engage students and make sure they understand everything that they're being presented. We also have the bookstore committee, which we have a plan with Follett to pretty much revamp the bookstore. And so we got a floor plan model, and we've been discussing ways to make the bookstore more appealing and more upgraded and better for students and staff and faculty, and to make it more aware that it's actually a bookstore and not just a convenience store, is what some students have called it. And we also have the Student Fee Advisory Committee. We only had one meeting, and I was made the chair of that. And then we just discussed fees and how they are implemented on campus. And then, last but not least, I've been talking with senators, getting them engaged, coming to the office, making sure they understand the calendar and email and duties as a senator, and also trying to help them figure out projects over the summer. And that's all I have. Thank you. Any questions?
Caleb, any questions?
One. Caleb, welcome. I had a quick question. As you know, we're going to review our budget tonight and make probably a final determination. We already had one budget hearing. Have the students given you any feedback? Because we do have a proposal to increase tuition by a small amount. I'm curious if you've had feedback, positive or negative, from students.
From students, no feedback, honestly. Robert and I are both students, Robert, the vice president of ASNIC, and we've talked about it, and we think that it's fine. It's not too bad for us, and we think it's totally doable for most students out there.
Thank you. We hope so, too. We think it's a small amount, but it's good to have feedback. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Caleb, before you sit down, it sounds like for being out of session, you've been pretty busy.
Yeah, I like to stay busy. Keeps me focused. On my
Nice
feet
job.
all the time.
Good. Sounds like you're getting organized. Thank you
Trying.
very much.
Thank you.
Our next report is Staff Assembly. Teresa Henderson.
Good evening, Chair Howard, everyone. I think this last staff assembly meeting was probably my most, favorite one of the year. We learned who the new senators were, and then Susie Dean, my awesome vice chair, had some very nice certificates printed out with the help of our copy center. So she printed out certificates for everyone that was nominated for one of the Staff Appreciation Awards, along with the nominations that were submitted. And then we got to hand those out to everybody, so it was nice to be able to recognize those folks in front of their coworkers. And that was pretty much the whole meeting. And Susie Dean will be graciously stepping into my role for the next fiscal year. And I must say she is super excited about that. And that concludes my report.
Any questions?
Just a comment. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Always great to get to meet
It's been
people.
an eye-opening experience. It's been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Jeff Carr, for Faculty Assembly.
Thank you, Chair Howard, trustees, President McLennan, and President's Cabinet. We had quite a robust meeting. It went quite long. We did elect new senators and alternates for next year. Usually our May meeting is kind of the hardest one to get people excited about that, and I sort of switched things up by inviting a lot of very important people to talk about some very important topics. So we did have some very robust conversations. First, I would like to thank Dr. Lita Burns for coming to address concerns about campus space and the College Skills Division based on a resolution that we had passed last April. A College Skills rep did express disappointment they weren't informed about some proposed changes, and Burns said the administration and faculty need to work on a better communication system that will make sure such problems won't happen in the future. She also talked about some possible space concerns, including the testing center. She also brought Chief Information Officer Ken Wardinsky to sort of talk about one of those efforts involving the Molstead Computer Lab. He said it was currently being underutilized as a resource, and there have been plans to sort of distribute the computers around campus to be more accessible for students, and the testing center might take some of that abandoned computer space. We then had a discussion about financial aid and tuition policies. I would like to give a big thank you to President McLennan, Financial Aid Office Director Stephanie House, VP for Student Services Graydon Stanley, and VP for Finance and Business Services Chris Martin. I would never call my colleagues like a hostile crowd, but we did have some very important conversations, and it could have been easy. I did invite them relatively late. They could have easily not come because they realized they would receive such hard questions, but they all showed up. And not only did they answer the questions, but for the first time in the history that I can remember, we went beyond our hour. We were able to do that because we had exams and not necessarily had to rush off the class, and they were able to stick around and answer all our questions until we had no more questions to be answered. Chris Martin outlined the tuition policy that's on your budget, fielded a number of questions on the subject as well as on block tuition. He said the proposed option that you see before you on the budget is one of 4. He said it was the best one because it encouraged students to complete in 15 credits and to earn block tuition, and by taking those 15 credits, and the proposal would not adversely affect revenue. Sort of piggybacking on that, President McLennan sort of cited what we heard earlier from Complete College America and their efforts to redefine a full-time student to 15 credits. The center believes that we're not doing a service to students by telling them that they can complete in 2 years if they only take 12 credits, which I believe you even called unethical, and that way it might be more important to go to a 15 credit hour plan. And he also sort of went on saying that guided pathways might be able to untether financial aid restrictions to give students more flexibility. Graydon Stanley was able to comment on some of that and confirm that students could not receive financial aid for courses that are not listed in their degree emphasis, that the government might be cracking down on institutions that do so, and he said that his office is working with the foundation to sort of allocate funds for students who don't necessarily qualify for financial aid or have other immersion needs. Finally, Stephanie House was sort of able to sort of quell any concerns about students running out of financial aid for remedial services. She said it shouldn't concern most students here because there's separate financial guidelines for up to 30 credits for that. Overall, the faculty expressed a desire that the administration should meet with them regularly to keep the lines of communication open. And again, I would like to thank you all for coming out and offering your input. Are there any questions?
Any questions of Jeff? Thank you very much. Our next report is Jessica DeWitt for the Senate. Jessica?
Thank you, Chair Howard, trustees, President McLennan, and guests and PC members. I am Jessica DeWitt. I am not the chair of the Senate. She is unable to be with us, so I am here to report on her behalf. So our last College Senate meeting was on May 11th, and our first item of business, which we love to do for our May meeting, was to elect our new officers. So Lisa Kellerman will be your Senate chair that you will see on a monthly basis. I was elected as the vice chair, hence why I'm here. Michelle Lippert was elected as the parliamentarian. Kathy Sparks was elected as the corresponding secretary. Then Lisa was able to take over the meeting, and Josh took off his hat. He was very excited to do so. I'm sure he'll miss you guys. So our old business, we went over the faculty procedure 3.0216. That was the compensation structure procedure, which we had previously, in the previous meeting, passed the policy and the staff procedure. And so this was the faculty procedure that was approved for a second reading. We then worked on 2 IT policy and procedures. There was 3.0801, which was the acceptable use, and the 3.0802, which is the email usage. Both of those were also approved for a second reading. On our new business, we only had one item, so because there were changes made to one of the IT policies, it was referenced in policy 3.0211, which was political activities. It just referenced it, and so because there were changes made to that IT policy, we just had to make a quick revision in that political activities, and then it was approved for a first and second reading. And that is it. Any questions?
Any questions? Jessica, thank you. Thank you. President's report, Dr. Rick McLennan.
Thank you. I will be brief. First of all, I want to thank the trustees and really everybody here for participating in our commencement activities on May 12th. Really want to give a special recognition to Justin and all the events folks, the grounds crew, faculty who prepared our students to get to that point. You know, you heard from our child development folks this evening about the idea that enrollment is everybody's responsibility and getting people to completion equally is everybody's responsibility. And you see that reflected in commencement. And so I just want to recognize all the folks who are involved in that and thank you for your participation. It's always a fun day. Second, I just want to remind you that tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock we have the celebration for the Building the Future campaign close out, successfully closing out that $5 million campaign, and hope you can all make that. And then lastly, at your places is a internal, it's our version of an agenda for the pending State Board of Education meeting on June 14th and 15th, being hosted here at NIC, and just giving you just some of the time frames of what's going to be happening. And we've been asked, we've worked with the State Board, this particular meeting, it's a little bit unusual in that JFAC is also going to be in town touring North Idaho, and they've asked to dovetail in on the State Board time early on that first day. So they're going to be on campus. We're going to meet the bus out in front of this building and tour the extensive campus. I think it might take about 4 minutes to do what we're going to do, but we're going to take them by the collaborative facility site and talk about what that dirt is going to become. And then we'll circle back around and drop them off at the Meyer Health Sciences building, and we're going to be doing a presentation on the sim lab, the new sim lab that just came online there. And after that, we'll be walking back over to the sub, and the State Board and JFAC will then join together, and you can see the items starting at 10:30, those 3 items we've been asked to talk about. They're things we want to talk about. We had originally wanted to, as typical, take the State Board on a little trip out to the prairie and show them our new facility. They didn't want to do that. So we've created a drone video that goes through the hallways of the Parker Technical Education Center. So we're bringing the tour to them, and that'll be the beginning of our presentation. We have dinner at 5:30 that evening. Of course, you're all invited to attend. I hope you can make it. And I guess I'll just ask if you have any questions.
Any questions? Okay, the next agenda item is the second reading for the college calendars for the academic years 2027 and 2028. You have the difficult task of presenting this agenda item.
Thank you for recognizing that, Mr. Chair, members of the board, President McLennan, and guests. This is probably the most difficult item on the agenda tonight, so I'm seeking your support. For that, we presented at the last meeting. Again, looking forward to our calendar in those years, 27, 28, and 28, 29. Follows the format that we've had in the past. It was, as we review that calendar, we try to be in alignment with the local school districts as well. It's a little difficult to predict that far out, that that's exactly how it will play out. But outside of that, there are no major changes to the calendar. And after extensive debate tonight, I hope you'll choose to approve this calendar.
Mr. Chair.
Quick.
Well, I'll make a motion to approve it only if Graydon agrees he'll still be working here in 2029. I make a motion to approve the calendar as presented.
I second it.
I'd ask for discussion on this, but it might be rather lengthy. I do have a vacation I was planning in 2029. It hasn't quite all come together yet, but I suspect we can go ahead and vote on this. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Career security.
So Chris Martin gets the next easy topic. Is the second reading for the fiscal year 18 general fund budget.
Greg, check your name tag.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight to visit again about the FY18 general operating budget for North Idaho College and all of our affiliated grants and services tonight. I would begin by standing for questions, since we've had the opportunity to go through this last month as well as at the budget workshop. I really appreciate your time and interest in this subject and the great conversation that we were able to have at the workshop.
Yeah, just by way of background, so that everybody's aware of the fact, this is our second reading, obviously, but we also had a workshop that was pretty constructive. We had an opportunity to go through a lot of these items and discuss them in some detail. Are there any, well, first of all, is there a motion? Because there's nothing to discuss if we don't have a motion in a second.
Sure, I'll start that so we can get busy talking. Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we accept the budget as presented by the President McLennan and his crew, and I would recommend adoption of the motion to approve the institutional budget.
Is there a second?
Meyer seconds it.
Now we're open for discussion. Is there any discussion on the budget?
Yeah, I think there's plenty. I didn't get to come to the workshop, but I have fortunately had some very good meetings. If you don't mind, I will just start with a few items. The budget is always it's a value judgment for board members, council members, school board members. We value what fits the community, what helps students, what helps the college, and so we have to weigh all of that very carefully, especially when we're talking about any kind of a tax increase. And I do think it's very commendable that North Idaho College in the last 5 years worked very hard to not increase taxes, and we haven't done that. It's probably not a very sustainable model to do that forever. We should do it as long as we possibly can, but it's definitely not sustainable. I think that when you make a decision to take the full 3% of what's allowed up to for all taxing entities in the state of Idaho, that how I gauge it to decide between 0% to 3% is what kind of pressures are on the institution that we would go to the community and ask for them to do a full 3%. And those kind of pressures would be the potential loss of a program that would ultimately impact students in a very negative way, potential loss of our staff, our faculty, because we wouldn't be able to pay market wages. That would be a very crucial reason to raise taxes. A significant event that may have caused some kind of financial stress for the institution. And an example of that, Judy and I were on the board many years ago when, the state could not actually provide us with everything they approved, and so we had $1 million holdback, which was very stressful to the institution. So those are kind of the things that go into when you're looking at a full 3% for me. And in those times, I think we go to the community and we can tell them, we're kind of in dire straits, and it's really important to keep our operations going. And so we have to balance that somehow. Right now, we're in pretty good shape, but we also have obligations as we move forward in the future. And one of those obligations for me is attracting and keeping our quality employees, faculty, and staff, because they have the biggest impact on this institution and the future of our students. You know, we're not making widgets here. We're not manufacturing where we're going to sell something at Walmart or Sears. Our investment is in our people, and I think we need to be very committed to that. When I listened to Senator Nonini, I was really, really encouraged by that mindset, that thinking at the Higher Education Task Force, that education is an investment. And you have this group of businesses in Boise saying, yeah, we're not going to look at the tax increase. We're going to look at the investment and what that brings us down the road. So I thought that was a very, very good comment on his behalf. And he talked about, you know, helping his constituents understand that, the investment, and then again, the rest of the legislature understanding that investment. So there is an investment, is what I'm getting at. And there's an investment not just for all of us, but for our students. And that's why I asked Caleb about the tuition, because it's fair to ask what the feedback is. It's a very small amount of $3. And so I'm glad that you agreed that it's doable and you haven't heard anything from students, because I do think students have an obligation as well. We all have to come together. So I am comfortable with the 1%. I think it will help us continue to maintain our faculty and staff at market rates. And we won't start sliding backwards. We don't want to slide backwards. And I'm comfortable with the tuition increase. I'm also comfortable with the 2 positions that have been proposed. I know that Dr. McLennan worked very hard to find the funding for those positions through attrition, and I find that commendable. And so I think this is a great budget that you've presented, and with that, I'll open it up to other comments, I guess.
Any other comments?
First of all, I'd like to thank Christy Wood for her comments, and I do agree with everything that Christy has stated.
Thank you. I made a proposal at the workshop. I'm going to reiterate that proposal. I do have a little bit of a differing opinion than some of my other board members as to what I think is appropriate at this time, based on where we're at financially and the situation of the college. We are projecting a 3% decline in enrollment, and I think that's a conservative estimate, but we still are in a bit of a declining enrollment state, although it is stabilizing. We currently have a reserve of approximately 36%, which is excessive by normal accounting standards. Even when pressed, our auditors will go, well, 15 to say 22, but I think they're stretching it to appease us a little bit. Even when we identify some other funds to earmark for specific projects, if I understood Chris, that gets us down to around 31%, something to that magnitude. So we have a significant reserve balance right now. We have funded raises the last 2 years of 3% and 4% for the staff and faculty. I find it ironic that Aaron made a point about adjunct and part-time, since they were not included in this raise again, as they were not last year, until I pushed the issue between the first and second reading. And once again, I think it's egregious that they're not included in this raise. So what I think, in looking at this, based on looking at the other municipalities and those who have taken their full 3%, looking at the hospital district and the highway districts and the library district, looking at the school districts, including Kootenai down in Harrison, who have all had at least a bond and or a levy, in many instances both, I struggle with putting additional burden on the folks here in Kootenai County. We have the 3-legged funding stool for the college, the state, the property taxes of those in Kootenai County, and the tuition and fees. If I'm a homeowner with a child or multiple children attending NIC, I'm paying for one of the legs through the state, my income taxes and other fees and taxes that I pay. I'm paying through my property tax. If I'm a business owner, I'm paying even additionally there, and that's increasing potentially. And then I'm paying from the increased tuition for my child or children. So I'm getting hit by all three legs for an additional amount. My proposal, as I look at the 3% that was given to us by the state to cover our CTE instructors' increase in salary, if we do that and we go across the board to include, and again, we're excluding the adjunct and part-time faculty, but the rest of the full-time and tenured faculty, it covers about a third of our obligation. But if we go to a 1% across the board, then it's covered. And then we can come out with approximately 50 to 60,000, and we can give the 1% also to the adjunct and part-time faculty, which I think would be an equitable thing to do. I think some of those folks already feel that they're thought of as a bit of a second-class citizen or not, on an even par with their peers. And I think we send the wrong message if we don't give them the same increase as we give everybody else. That's just my opinion. I think we have such a reserve at this time that I think we, along the lines of what Christy was saying, I know it may not be sustainable forever, but I think we could go one more year without a tax increase and not add to the additional burden with all the other increases locally. Hopefully next year will be a tax environment without every municipality or school or other board not wanting to raise taxes, or maybe a more favorable environment that we could go out and get 1% or 2% and maybe it'd be more palatable to everybody. So my proposal is that we do a 1% across the board, including the adjunct and part-time, and that we're able to find the few pennies it would take us to include the adjunct and part-time. I also think that I would like to see the differential slightly higher between in-district and out-of-district tuition. So while I'm fine with the out-of-district tuition increase, I would like to see us, although it's, I believe, $3, I would like to see us not increase in-district tuition and give those folks in Kootenai County a little bit of a break. Because even if it's not the parents, if it's not their kid, it's somebody's grandparents, it's somebody's brother or sister, somehow everybody that's in Kootenai County, there's a family member or a friend or somebody that's still bearing that burden on the tax increase. And then you've got the tuition increase coming in also. I think we are in a position financially where we don't need to add that burden. And again, I'd like to see an increase in that differential between in and out of district tuition. The folks in Kootenai County are already bearing a substantial load there. And as we've talked about, it's kind of an unfair burden. One of the things that was talked about earlier tonight that came up in discussion was how do we approach the folks up north again in, say, Bonner County, up in the Sandpoint area. They've talked about maybe becoming a taxing district to help support us. I'd love to see that. I'd love to see any offload of the burden from just Kootenai County, but we'll see. But somewhere within these 5 northern districts, maybe we can get some help in the future. So we can do 1%. We can fund it. We don't need to raise tuition for in-district. We don't need to raise taxes. We can still give a raise that would give us 8% over the last 3 years, which I think is competitive for our instructors. And again, we'll have another opportunity to look at this again next year too if we think we need to do more then. And so that's my proposal. I think it's fair all the way around.
Todd, let me make sure I got this. Your proposal is 1% across the board salary increase, including adjuncts, and in-district tuition of no increase, and I didn't get the out-of-district.
Leave the other proposed increases as they are, sir.
The $5.
Yes, sir, and that increases that
Per credit.
differential by another $5 between in and out-of-district tuition. I want to see that. I think it's appropriate that differential increase a little bit.
All right, did I get all the elements of your?
And then I was proposing that we do not raise the taxes, sir.
No tax increase.
Yes, sir, for this one more year.
Property tax.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'm assuming this is a motion, and I want to make sure I've got all the elements in it.
We're in the middle of it. Motion.
Yeah, your motion, this is a motion to amend,
Okay.
right?
Yes, sir.
So your motion to amend is 1% across-the-board salary increase, including the adjuncts, no increase in district tuition. District stays the same at $5, or the increase is $5 per credit, and no property tax increase.
Yes, sir.
So is there a second for that? Hearing no second, your motion fails.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Judy?
Just to follow up on the motion that's before us, which is as the administration has recommended.
Yeah, we still have to vote on, we've got a motion and a second on the main proposal, which is
So I
to
wanted to
accept the budget as proposed.
And I wanted to speak to that a minute with a couple questions.
Yes.
As I understand this budget, and my questions had to do with, it seems like in my reading recently, I remember reading that there's a wait list at our career and technical building for classes there. Am I mixed up on that?
Chairman Howard, Trustee Meyer, as part of this proposal, it includes additional night classes for diesel program, as well as the starting of a night program for the machining program that I believe would relieve those concerns by adding additional programming.
And that was my first question. We can identify and meet those current known needs and also use the facility more hours than it currently is being used, which is always a happy note within this budget. That this budget, are there any other programs you wish we could do that this budget does not address at this time? Because I know every budget's going to have some reductions in it because it's the reality, but is there anything lingering out there that we should be thinking about for the consequences of if we had some greater revenue you really would like to have happen?
I'm going to look to my colleagues for any reminder that they may have, but I'm not aware of any that we're not meeting in this budget at this time.
Because one of the things we talked about was, as we heard tonight, the need not only for programs, but for advising and counselors to help folks get through the system. And you feel like we have that identified and in place?
Chairman Howard, Trustee Meyer, there are line item requests in the state budget for next fiscal year that dramatically increase our support for advising both in the high schools as well as on campus, looking at the summer completion initiative that we spoke to earlier.
Yep.
So all of those are in our request to the state for FY19, and that's how we're addressing those first, to see if we can get state support for those initiatives before they come back and are added to the general fund budget.
And to speak to that then was one where we asked for that complete college this summer and we didn't get it funded. Why are we going to get any better at funding next year if we don't do it ourselves?
Chairman Howard, Trustee Meyer, I think that's an excellent question, and I would tell you that we're...
It's not accusatory, it's empathetic.
No, absolutely, but I think to go at this with another run, after we've built a broader range of support for what the idea is, we feel like there is an opportunity to go back at this again and see if there's traction. In all fairness, we may not get very far, but it is our valiant effort to try to see if we can sway more support towards this, especially since the adult completer program has gone twice now and didn't receive support.
And it may be that part of that responsibility falls back on the board and the community to lobby our legislators for it. It isn't all us by ourselves.
Absolutely.
Do you have something more?
Well, I just wanted to add that, we're looking at, obviously through the line item request, to see what level of state support we could get for this. In the context of developing those line item requests, we couldn't have that conversation without having it in the context of the governor's task force on higher education and some of the themes that are emerging out of that, which you heard this evening. And so there's a lot on the horizon that's optimistic for us in that direction that, frankly, we want to see how that plays out. But this is a priority, isn't going to change for NIC. We've talked internally about a number of ways of starting some pilot processes around some of the things that we're talking about that are in the line item requests, that we may come to you mid-year or somewhere along the line if these things don't play out the way we'd like them to, and say, we may want to do some pilot projects even out of the fund balance if we decided that was the way to go. But these are not things that we're letting go. We're just trying these alternative approaches first.
Good, then my other list of things to think about was obviously faculty, and we need to be sure and recognize those we have, not only be competitive, but be ahead. We want to be the best, so why not have the best faculty, which I think requires recognition with funding. Then facilities would be the, well, program we've already talked about, because that's my mantra, but then the facilities to do the programs. You think with the budget we have now, with the buildings we have, the maintenance, no deferred maintenance, because that only bites us later, and the upcoming buildings, this budget will make all those things happen?
Chairman Howard, Trustee Meyer, two responses to that, and one of those is inside the plant fund, and I will find that page for you here. Just a note, this board over many years has been diligent in funding regular deferred maintenance, which is part of this general operating budget that takes care of the ongoing maintenance of our existing facilities. And so we're in a unique situation where we've planned out what's going to happen over a number of years and built budget to fund that. And so that's unique, frankly, to North Idaho College. A lot of colleges, when I have the chance to speak to my peers both in the state and out, are very jealous of that fact. And so that's built in on a regular basis, knowing that the useful life of carpet in some of these buildings is 10 years. So we have to know that we're going to replace that, and that's part of that deferred maintenance schedule. So that's addressed. The next piece is on the one-time expense requests. Let's talk about some of the space planning things you've heard about today to allow for the opportunity for us to better utilize the space, create more student-centric areas. That is included in a request for some remodel money that's in that one-time line item request. So we feel like that has been addressed in this budget.
Good, thank you. My only other, in our deferred maintenance, which is the only part of it, then there's the water leak that we never figured on, that drips on all the technology that ripples into a lot. We have the reserves enough to hopefully deal with the scariest of scaries, as much as you can predict. How's your crystal ball on that?
Chairman Howard, Trustee Meyer, thankfully I don't have to have a crystal ball because we have ICRIM coverage. And so between the ICRIM coverage that the college carries, as well as the reserves that we have in the event of a large-scale issue, we're in a good place. I will tell you that this year I walked the levee many a day as that water kept rising, and knowing that in the event that we had a breach, that we had a backup plan and reserves that we could fall on, as well as use the ICRIM plan. So while we don't have a crystal ball, and I don't think we're insured against every possible issue, we're in a better place than most with the level of our ICRIM coverage and our reserves.
So in that sense, we feel like we've done responsible management.
Absolutely.
Of our facilities. Thank you. That completes my questions.
Any other questions?
We taking last final
Yes.
comments? All right. For the record, I will say this. I'm disappointed in the unequal treatment, even almost disrespectful treatment of our adjunct and part-time faculty and how we've approached them in the last 3 years, actually, and continuing this year. And it's embarrassing that I had to fight so hard last year to get them equal footing. So I'm going to leave you with that. I think that's disappointing in how some of you are treating your colleagues, and you're not looking out for them equally.
Mr. Chair.
So Todd, I'm trying to understand that comment. Of course, we value adjunct faculty, and I think that they have great employment here at NIC. Adjunct is not the same as full-time, they're just not. A lot of them work in the community, that's why we seek them out for their expertise, but they're not full-time educators and maybe don't even have the same kind of experience or education as our full-time faculty. And so I don't know if you're saying that we're not at market rate. I would be interested in looking at that if we're not at market rate for adjunct, but in no way do I think that NIC is disrespectful to adjunct faculty. We appreciate them and certainly rely upon them. So I would be interested in what the actual rates are when you make that comment.
Well, I see it as, are you treating them equally? And in their eyes, and I've had quite a bit of feedback over the last 3 years on this topic, they see it differently. Let me just say it that way. They see whether it's an intentional or unintentional message or maybe they're reading more into it than they should, they see it as an unequal treatment, and they take that to mean that they're valued less, and they're not on par with their peers, and so there's a number of things to that if you think it through, but
So let me give
we'll
you
leave
a
it at
quick
that.
analogy. Full-time police officers and reserve officers. The police association and unions do not go out and fight for reserve officers to make the same wages because they're not at the same skill level, they're not full-time. There is a disparity in wages.
But see, let's use the military then. When I came out of the academy with a regular commission, I was paid the exact same as somebody that came out of OTC or ROTC. And as we go forward, I did over 10 years active and then resigned my regular commission and took a reserve commission. At that time, I was still paid the same as a major on active duty, on a regular commission or whatever. So in the military, we don't make that distinction. If you carry the rank, time and grade, time and service, and the rank, you're paid exactly the same, whether you're National Guard, Air Force Reserve, I'm using Air Force, but any military branch. If you're National Guard, Reserve, or active duty, it's exactly the same pay scale. So why they do that in the police, I don't know. I have no insight to that. But in the military, we're assumed to be able to fill the same position, to have the same training, all that sort of thing. Now, granted, not everybody has the same, hours on the job. A reserve guy won't have done it as much as a active duty guy. Won't be as in the cockpit as much, or whatever his Air Force specialty code is, his AFSC. But we're still compensated exactly identically.
Judy?
On that topic, then, could our administration comment on their thinking?
I'm going to defer in a minute on this, but it was my understanding as we were working through the budget conversations on this that there had been a significant recalibration of part-time faculty salaries at some point? No?
Chairman Howard, President McClendon, in reviewing this last year at the request of the board and looking at this between readings, we did go out and do a comparison of where we fell with our competitor institutions last year and totally agreed that the alignment last year helped us remain competitive with the standard adjunct rate in our area. At this time this year, it was our interpretation of where we were at, that we were competitive with adjunct rates at this time.
Oh, then I may have misunderstood that. Maybe it was just the review of the alignment. Okay.
Any other comments or questions? I have I don't know if I'm going to make a motion or not on this, but I had talked at the workshop about the idea of increasing the taxes 3% this year rather than 1%, and dedicating 2% of that to the capital building fund. My experience on this board, when I came on, two of the board members who are still here were suffering from the aftermath of what was then called what was it?
Foregone?
The foregone taxes. And that this institution, in order to be able to pursue its obligations to build facilities, had to go back in and ask the taxpayers for foregone taxes. And it became an irritant to the community, a big issue. And so I'm of the firm belief that after 7 years now of saving money, we were able to build the CTE facility by saving the money. And we've committed funds from each tax year to continue to save money. That's really what the future pathway should be. We can't expect, I don't think, help from the state. We can't expect very much help from any other resources other than our own savings. So that I would hope that we could embark on a program of taking 2 additional percentage points and committing that to the capital fund so that we can continue to build up our capital reserve. We are in need of funds in the near future for parking structures, for a new athletic facility, probably for those are 2 outstanding facilities that come to mind. There are probably additional buildings that are going to need to be built in the next foreseeable 5 to 6, 7 years. And we're not going to have the money if we don't start saving it now. So my proposal is to raise the taxes by another 2% this year and dedicate it to the capital fund. But I'm not going to make a motion on that. until I hear from the rest of the board as to whether or not there's any sentiment to support it.
I would be reluctant to propose more than a 1%. Some of what Todd said about the school districts just out doing their levies they're on a 2-year cycle, and although 1% is an increase, I just couldn't support 3%.
And, Mr. Chair, I'm going to tell you that I think that you're being very visionary. I know this because it does matter to you that we have the appropriate facilities, and that CTE building was incredibly important. We couldn't have done it if we hadn't done it the way we did, and with the help of the foundation, certainly. But I just have a hard time with accepting that the state won't pay for those future buildings. I really do. I feel it's their role. I don't feel it's the role of Kootenai County residents, even though it seems like it's the only way to get it done. I want to fight against that. I want the state to step up because our taxpayers are already funding, what we're doing, just operations every year. And they're paying their taxes to the state, and the state needs to be in charge of facilities. So I don't want to adopt that model, even though I know it's how we did the last one. But I think we should supplement those kind of projects where it's appropriate and where we can, but still really, really push the state to take that burden. Some of the other issues is if you look at the percentages, and I did, about thank you, Chris, for the information on what it will cost homeowners. So a 1% right now to Kootenai County residents with their homeowners exemption and their houses valued with the exemption at $200,000, a 1% is going to cost $1 a year. Now, that seems pretty low. But with all the taxing entities, the school districts, the cities, the highway districts, the water districts, sewer districts, library districts, if everybody says, well, 1%, 2%, 3%, then it really starts to have an impact. And so that's what I'm leery about. I think the 1% is something that we should do because we can't go on year after year after year without, building our budget. But I feel very uncomfortable with anything beyond that because we aren't at a situation where we're going to have a loss of program, or we aren't going to lose staff, and we haven't had a catastrophic event. So I feel like we can just keep moving forward, and that 1% will help us do that.
Mr. Chair?
What I'm hearing is you're suggesting 3%?
Well, I'm asking the question about how the board feels about that
Right.
for a limited purpose.
A very
defined
focused purpose for that, okay. And I'm hearing 1%, so I was going to suggest 2%. Because I like the idea of planning ahead. And we heard most things are in place now, but that's never as much as what we might be needing in the future. So to help feedback to our chair, probably the 3% is not palatable, as we've heard from other board members. So even if I did want to go with 3%, we don't have the vote to do it. So I'm going to try for 2%.
Todd?
Well, first off, I appreciate Brad and Christie echoing my concern that we don't stack any additional taxes on top of the various taxing districts that have already been putting the additional burdens on the taxpayers here locally. I would agree with Christie also that, although she didn't say this, I think it's been part of it, but it's implied, there was a little bit of a dangerous precedent that was set when we self-funded for our building, and we've talked about that internally. And Christie, I would also suggest to you that it's actually a tangible responsibility of the state. It's incumbent upon them,
Right.
So especially the CTE, technically they're supposed to be funding it. So, like you, I'll remain somewhat optimistic and hopeful that the state will meet their obligation in the future. And again, it's you and Brad. I just think with the current tax burdens, and Brad makes a point on the 2-year cycles, which I was kind of alluding to as part of my earlier discussion on next year might be a better year just in the way the things cycle, that I'm struggling with the 1% already. I definitely would not like to see 2 or 3%, if I'm kind of speaking to both Judy and Ken on this one.
Right. I appreciate your comments. I'm not going to make a motion, so you won't have to worry about looking for a second. But what we do have is we have a motion and a second on adopting the fiscal year 18 budget as presented. There's no more discussion. We'll call a vote. All in favor? Was there more discussion?
I didn't know if she wanted to amend
No,
it
I'm
for the
thinking,
2%.
go ahead, thank you.
Okay, more discussion? No. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
I'm in favor of the motion. So the budget passes as presented. We have another issue to discuss, and that is the establishment of a reserve account for the acquisition of property.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion on that. I think it's a responsible thing to do. So my motion is that we adopt a board-designated reserve account for the acquisition of property and transferring, at this time, $1 million into an unrestricted general fund balance onto the newly established account. And with that, those funds, we could look into the future about the growth of the college right around us. We have opportunities right around us that we will need to pursue, and we need to have the financial ability to do that when the time arises. So that's my motion.
I'll second it.
Is there a second? Okay. Any discussion? Judy?
I'm glad for this motion and this topic. I think that's what we should be doing for long-range planning. And you've chosen the amount, this designated amount. Does that limit us if we found there was something more we needed to do and needed more money to do it?
I suspect it can come back before the board at any time that the administration feels that there's some adjustment in the budget that needs to be done.
Just wanted to confirm that
Transfer
then.
of funds.
Chairman Howard, Trustee Meyer, also, if the college did pursue a purchase, that would come before the board. So in the event that we needed additional funds, we would make that request with the purchase.
Okay. Thank you, then. That completes my question.
Any other discussion? So the motion is to create the fund for acquisition of property and transfer $1 million into it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous. So I think that concludes tab 2.
Chairman Howard, if I may, I would just like to recognize Sarah Garcia and the work of the Office of Finance and Business staff. They do a yeoman's job, and while I get to stand up here, it is definitely not all me, and I would like to recognize their hard work.
Well, thank you very much. We thank them.
Chris, wasn't that yo woman's rather than yo men's?
It's a yo person, yeah.
Okay. Next item is tab 3. It's the first reading of the board meeting schedule for 2017-18.
Yep. You have this as an attachment. It's
Tab 3.
tab 3.
Right.
And I think it's self-explanatory. If you have questions or thoughts about it,
Mr. Chair, as we look at tab 3, you've identified 2 meetings where there are conflicts. Am I reading September? Fourth Wednesday conflicts with. So that's why we moved it back to the 20th. I didn't look at the calendar. Is that a third or fourth Wednesday?
Yes, and Shannon, do you want to just briefly touch on those?
While she's coming in, the other one was the November 15th. We had identified that because it conflicts with Thanksgiving, so this is a moved back date of November 15th.
Trustee Meyer, that is correct. The September 20th meeting is moved back because on the regular fourth Wednesday conflicts with the ACCT conference, which many of you are going to.
So in fact, these dates that are noted here are the moved back date.
Exactly.
Good, thank you.
That's the proposed calendar based on those conflicts.
And that led us to Monday, to December 18th, same phenomena. January 17th, again, we hope misses the JFAC, which it usually does by choosing that date.
Yes, that should work. We'll see.
And my understanding is, along the way, if we still find a need to change, we can. So this is just a script for starter. Calendar planning, thank you.
Right, any Motion and a second.
Sure, Brad will make that motion.
There you go, Brad.
You know, at home, I get bossed around, too.
Opportunities for expression.
I just feel like I'm making all of it.
Extension of the earlier session.
I need a second.
I'll second that.
All right. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Christie,
Any
is it okay
opposed?
if I say aye?
Okay.
Send them home.
This is such a ministerial thing. I'm going to do something I normally argue against, and that is, let's avoid the second reading, unless there's a reason. And
Oh,
just
sure.
Consider this the second reading.
Sure.
I need a motion to do that.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
So this will go as
Done.
passed, as adopted. We don't have to have a second reading on it. Okay. The next is tab 4, approval of the real property leases. Chris?
Chairman Howard, members of the board, the college leases multiple facilities as part of our ongoing operations to deliver programs and outreach to students and children across the 5-county service area. This is something we started last fiscal year. We did it in August, and it is our intent to have these approved before the leases actually start. You'll notice this year one new lease for the Community United Methodist Church for a new North Idaho Head Start program that the board approved as part of the duration grant. So that is a new one that you're seeing this time. The other leases before you are the renewal of the Area Agency on Aging lease. This is funded by the Area on Aging grant. The Bonners Ferry Outreach Center, this is general fund funded. The Sandpoint Outreach Center and the Silver Valley Outreach Center, those are funded through the general fund. The University of Idaho, second floor Molstead Library use agreement. I'd like to make note, this is not a lease, it is a use agreement. We're bringing it before you for the annual approval. This one is unique in that we actually use space in the Molstead Library that has an easement that the University of Idaho holds. So the University of Idaho charges us to use a portion of their easement, and we charge them the exact same amount for the upkeep and services that we provide to that facility. The Community United Methodist Church Head Start Center is funded through the Head Start grant. Julian Boucher is funded through the Head Start grant, as well as Lakeland, Sandpoint, and Shoshone. These are all included in the budget that was just approved, so the funds are approved for these leases either through the general fund, the Area Agency on Aging grant, or the Head Start grant.
All right, so we need a motion to adopt the leases in a second, then we can discuss them.
So if I move that we approve the leased properties in tab 4, I'll stop there.
I'll second.
Now we second, now we have a discussion. Any discussion on any of the properties or the provisions of the leases? Yes, Judy?
Discussion would be, the list you read is it, because one of the things we did by building the CTE building was, in fact, turn off some other leases. And so that was part of the funding we were looking at to reduce costs for leases and then use the building. So of these leases, the only one I had a question about was I think you explained it, the use, not the lease, but the use agreement with the University of Idaho. And my question, I think you covered, but let me be sure, was the costs then of being in that space, which would be utilities, insurance, janitorial, furnishings or equipment that's in it. And what I heard you say was that is all charged back, sort of thing, for all those items? So the cost to us is what?
Zero.
That's a good number.
It's a good number. So it works out as a net zero.
Net zero.
They charge us for the space, and we turn around and send them an invoice for the same amount for the upkeep and services we provide.
Just an informational question, Chris. When we go out and lease from Community United Methodist Church, what type of due diligence do we do to make sure it's a safe environment? And I'm sure you've taken a look at it, but what do you do?
Absolutely. So Chairman Howard and Trustee Murray, as part of the Head Start lease, the Head Start agreement, we go through and do extreme diligence on those facilities because it has to meet child care standards. And so not only do we review those facilities, but we have Health and Human Service support that reviews not only the lease, but the floor plans, make sure everything passes muster before we pursue those leases.
And I would add that we've also signed assurances that we would do those things as recipients of those funds.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments on the leases? All right, hearing no more discussion, I'll call for a vote. All in favor of approving the leases?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the leases are approved. Thank you. We should note, this is kind of a new thing for us. The policy that we're developing, and we got to get into a written policy, I think, is that the board is going to approve all interest in real property. And that's why we're seeing these leases come up this year, and this will happen yearly. The next item is the board chair report. The Idaho Community College Consortium Group is going to meet July the 16th here in the Coeur d'Alene area, actually. Or excuse me, June, yeah.
Say it again, Ken.
June 16th. And
Here?
Here, in the Coeur d'Alene area. And we are pleased to add another member to our group, which will now be the College of Eastern Idaho. The ITech got their funding bond issue, not the bond issue, it's a levy, yeah, approved with, I think, close to 70% of the vote.
77.
Yeah, which was a very impressive vote. We've been in contact with them, the other community colleges, through the presidents and the chairs, anticipating this, and the progress, the procedure is going to be that the State Board of Education will now appoint an interim Board of Trustees for that college, and then they'll set up an election schedule, and they'll have to stand for election. They'll stagger the terms as our terms are staggered, and they'll have to do the district creation and that sort of thing. But once that interim Board of Trustees is put together, we're going to call a meeting of all of the trustees and sit down and try and help them get oriented on what we need to do, what they need to do, have them ask questions, and hopefully get them off to a good start. This particular effort down in the Idaho Falls area is really kind of unique in many ways because they have all the facilities they need. I mean, they've been a technical college for a long time, and they've got more room than they need. They are able to immediately start a full array of courses as soon as they get their accreditation and that sort of thing. So they're moving quickly, and it's really exciting, I think, to have 4 community colleges in the state of Idaho. We now geographically pretty well cover the state. And it just is a testament, I think, to the value of community colleges and how that value is seen around the state, that they got such a good turnout and they had such a good result. So I'm pleased, very pleased to welcome them to the family of community colleges. Other than that, we have some pinning ceremonies coming up in July, and the really big raffle is in July 12th. We have one more meeting for the trustees in June, and then we get July off. And that's my report. Are there any remarks for the good of the order?
Just one, Mr. Chair. I would like, after the presentation tonight on celebrating success, I thought that was a good presentation. I want to just set the seed for President McLennan and the rest of us, next year's budget. Let's take a look at that. And that waiting list is atrocious. And I see that as a barrier for students coming to school if they don't have childcare. So I think we need to try to address that, a bigger facility and more staff. So that gives us something to shoot for.
Okay.
Not shoot.
Yeah, we won't shoot there.
Any other comments for the good of the order?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
if I may, because I know we're kind of early from what we expected, so I would like to recognize, you talked earlier tonight about how busy Caleb was, and one of the things I wanted to mention is, of course, our former president is out here in the audience. Sean is here as well. Caleb, who's joined us tonight, both of them are working for the college this summer in the advising office and helping students navigate that advising and registration process. So we're pleased to have them here. It's also very difficult for us to ever get the financial aid folks to come out in public, and two of them happen to be here tonight, our Director of Student Financial Aid, Stephanie House, and Randy Reagan, one of her staff, and they've been doing an excellent job. So I wanted to recognize them in the audience tonight. I trust that they're waving at this point to you.
Way, very cool. Very nice.
And lastly, I'd like to thank the members of our administration and other employees here who have for the last several weeks and will over the next couple weeks be making presentations at all the Region 1 high schools of scholarship award recipients. Thanks to the foundation for their incredible support that they provide to our students, and then to all these folks who are out at the high schools making those presentations and recognizing those scholarship award winners who will be coming to NIC next fall.
What kind of scholarships are those?
What kind?
What do you call them?
Those foundation scholarships?
Oh, yeah, well, there was the other, you renamed the,
Oh, the Cardinal Grant, too. Our grant and aid, we're talking about renaming that to Cardinal Grant as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other remarks? Good. Hearing none, we are adjourned.